The views and opinions expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect that of radio station WVLT, Clear Communications Incorporated, its staff and management, or our sponsors. WVLT, Clear Communications Incorporated, retains the right to record all phone calls received during this program for future promotions.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Steve Solof, and this is InformTheVoteNJ.com radio hour here on Cruisin' 92.1 WVLT in Vineland. Tonight, I have my guest, Patricia Clarke-Kears. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Okay. And she is running for Millville City Commission, upcoming in this general election in November. But before I get into a conversation with her, I want to remind everybody about the usual format here. Basically, I start every show with an introductory report to help set the tone for the show. Then I'll dive into a conversation with Patricia to have her introduce herself, give you a high-level overview of her campaign message, and then we'll get into my normal 3 advocacy ideas. So let's dive into the introductory report. I've been thinking a lot about what kind of tone I wanted to set for tonight's show, and I keep coming back to this simple idea. This doesn't have to be difficult. And I mean that both in a technical sense and in a philosophical sense. Because what I do, collecting and sharing information about candidates and their campaigns, really isn't that complicated. But in practice, it turns into something a lot more cumbersome and evasive than it needs to be. Let me explain. I went to the Harrison Township meeting in Mullica Hill last night. You might be wondering why I'd drive out to Mullica Hill on a Monday night to sit through a local township meeting. It's because Lawrence Moore, who is the deputy mayor there, is running for General Assembly in Legislative District 3. And while that race isn't on my own ballot in Vineland, about 17,000 people here in Cumberland County do vote in LD3. Their concerns are directly connected to the broader concerns of Cumberland County and South Jersey as a whole. And because of that, this race has come up several times in my coverage, at Republican breakfasts and here on the radio with Assemblyman Antoine McClellan. And I'll be honest, normally there wouldn't be much reason for me to sit in a municipal building 30 minutes away listening to people talk about street parking and raised sidewalks. That meeting in a vacuum wasn't especially eventful. They went through ordinances and resolutions with almost no pushback. A few folks from the local HOA talked about people parking on the wrong side of the street, trimming trees, and making sure speed limits are enforced. Another resident suggested modeling policies on other towns. And if I'm being honest, I don't even remember every detail, because usually none of it would have anything to do with my work. But here's the thing, this isn't necessarily a hobby for me anymore. This feels more like a job. 99% of people are not driving to a neighboring county on a Monday night to sit through an uneventful meeting just so they can stand up and say, hey, we need more information about Lawrence Moore in Cumberland County. But that's exactly why I do it, because someone really should. Lawrence Moore is potentially moving from representing around 13,000 people in a township to representing 230,000 people across 3 counties. That's a big leap, and it comes with a real obligation to explain to voters, especially those who don't know you and those who realize that incumbents are already doing the job, what exactly you plan to do if you get elected. To be transparent, I haven't met Lawrence Moore personally yet, so there's every chance he doesn't know much about my platform. But he probably should. The broader political apparatus he's connected to, the same network of party leaders and organizations that's been aware of InformTheVoteNJ.com for the last 2 years, absolutely does know. And this is not unique to one side of the aisle. One of his opponents in that same race, Assemblyman Dave Bailey, whom I met at Deerfield Day last year, had about a 5-minute conversation with me about building this centralized civic information hub so voters wouldn't have to piece everything together themselves. He seemed supportive. He handed me his card and told me to reach out when election season picked up. So here we are. His name is on the ballot, and I've reached out, and I've heard nothing. And this is the broader pattern I keep seeing. A candidate or a sitting official will say, I'd be happy to participate when the time is right. But when the time comes, there's no follow-through, no response, no information. And then some of those same folks will turn around and say the voters are uninformed, unengaged, and that my coverage seems one-sided. Well, voters might be unengaged because people like me are trying to help streamline the engagement process, and many candidates or organizations simply don't cooperate. Of course, it's going to look one-sided, where people will be unengaged if you don't show up and put your ideas in front of people, especially in the modern high-tech standards of 2025. And it's not just the candidates. Over the weekend, I spoke with a few people who have been involved in local politics for years and who've done a lot of good work. When I suggested the idea of working together to put together a simple list of about 10 key issues for voters and candidates to review this fall, there was a little hesitation. And I get it, everyone's busy, but at the same time, come on. Let's take that one extra step to make sure people have something to refer to when they finally start paying attention in October. It's not about making anybody look bad, it's about helping the process work a little better. Because what we're seeing in LD3 and in a lot of other races is that voters are being asked to choose people to represent 230,000 residents, including thousands here in Cumberland County, without much of a structured presentation of what those candidates actually plan to do. And to be clear, when I say a structured presentation, I'm mostly referring to a comprehensive information hub. Because sure, most candidates are obviously campaigning, but unless you're tapped in and following along as an average voter, there's a good chance those campaigns won't be on your busy radar. And that leads me back to what I always say about challengers like Moore and his ticket mate. If you're running against an incumbent, you have an inherent obligation to explain why voters should make a switch. Beyond the slogans, beyond the party labels, what specific skills and ideas do you bring that are going to make things better? Especially for moderates, independents, and people who want to go deeper than yard signs and slogans and sporadic social media posts. And LD3 is just one example. If you look at the Millville City Commission race, you've got 5 seats open and probably close to 25 candidates by the time petitions are finalized. That's a huge amount of information to sort through, assuming everyone actually participates. So when I'm asking candidates to submit basic background and agenda information, I'm not just being a nudge. It's appropriate coordination for the information pipeline. And to be clear, the content doesn't have to be created through my platform. If a candidate already has a solid campaign website, a laid-back introductory interview somewhere, and a more in-depth discussion about their policy positions, I'll just copy and paste the links and information onto my site. That's the whole point of an information hub, to pull everything together so voters can find it in one place. The main reason I offer services like radio interviews or podcasts is because a lot of times that information simply doesn't already exist. Because we either want voters to be informed, and that requires a fair amount of cooperation, or we don't actually care if voters are informed. And that's why I appreciate Patricia Clarke-Kears' approach. She maybe only learned about my platform about a month ago. Since then, she's done an impromptu interview at the No Kings rally. She's filled out a thorough questionnaire. She's coming on this show tonight, and we plan to do a follow-up podcast later in the summer to dig even deeper. So not only can I cross Patricia off my to-do list as a candidate who has engaged, I can also say confidently, as a Cumberland County resident, that I believe Patricia is the kind of person who will address a constituent's concern, even if that concern is as simple as asking for campaign information. So, as we get into the conversation tonight, keep that in mind. This doesn't have to be difficult. You show up, you answer questions, you explain your ideas, and you let voters decide. And if more candidates and more organizations took that approach, we'd all be a little better off. So, let's get into it. Hi, Patricia.
Hi, Steve.
Did you fall asleep yet?
Yeah, not yet.
After all that talking?
I took a nap this afternoon.
Oh, okay. You're and I've got my liquid energy drink to keep me all wired up. Anyway, so why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how it's relevant to why you got into politics?
Okay, my name is Patricia Clarke-Kears. I'm a lifelong resident of Millville. I am seeking this 4-year term on the City Commission because I've always been interested in politics. I've been attending the meetings for the last, actually since January of 2022 when this new commission.
The Millville City Commission
Millville City
meetings.
Commission, yes.
Okay.
And I've missed maybe 2 or 3. But my big concern was I don't like the direction Millville is going necessarily. I don't see development the way I would like to see it happen in economic development. I don't see choices made at City Hall that I necessarily would make that I think would be better.
Sure.
And the other thing is, I'm one of the few people who go to the podium at almost every meeting. And I ask questions, I express my satisfaction or dissatisfaction, I offer suggestions or ideas. And this experience really tipped my decision into being a candidate.
What experience do you mean?
Well, I want to put this in a positive way, so
Sure.
I'll do it that way. If elected, I'm going to treat every person at the meeting with courtesy, dignity, respect, and maturity. I will treat my fellow commissioners with the same. More importantly, I will answer all questions asked of me. If I do not know the answer right then and there, I will obtain an email address or a phone number. I will call that person, and then at the next meeting 2 weeks later, during my report time, I would give the question and the answer, because I hear from so many people, they are so frustrated at the questions not being answered.
Right.
So I think it's important to do that. It makes people feel like they matter.
Sure.
And their ideas matter and their concerns are important.
Let me dig into that just a little bit more, because doing what I'm doing from my angle, I oftentimes also have unanswered emails or whatever. So are you saying you're hearing from constituents that there's a recurring problem of a lack of communication?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the last few meetings I've heard people say as they're leaving the room, the questions weren't answered again. They said they would answer the questions. My question wasn't answered. And they're like so frustrated and furious, they don't come back. They don't engage.
Yeah. I've heard that general sentiment from other candidates where there's, I guess you could say, a feeling of futility in being engaged, where you have a legitimate concern and maybe you send an email and it never gets answered, or you go to one of these political type meetings or township meetings, and the structure is sometimes a little awkward for the regular public to engage in what I would call regular dialogue. As in, you're allowed to get up and do your public comment, but all the public comments have to come in succession, and then afterwards the commissioners will address whichever ones they feel like addressing, I assume. And there's kind of no room for back and forth dialogue, as in, oh no, you just misunderstood what my question was, but you're not allowed to say it. And so this feeling of like a regular conversation kind of leaves the building, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's difficult to have that kind of dialogue when you have a 5-minute time period.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand why that's done, because I know some people get up at the podium and they just rattle on and on.
Yeah.
But I get frustrated when I ask a question, either it isn't answered, or when it's answered, I don't have the ability to ask a follow-up question that I may have thought of. And I'm told, well, send me an email. I don't want to send you an email. That I've asked the question at the meeting.
Right.
I feel it's the responsibility of the commissioner to answer the question, to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know it then answer it 2 weeks later.
Sure.
People want answers.
Yeah, I mean, that's supposed to be an inherent part of the civic engagement process.
Transparency.
Not just transparency, but, the elected representatives can't know everything that's going on all the time. And so the natural process is, I have a problem, I go to the meeting, I ask the question, I hope there is either a sufficient answer, or if more research needs to be done or the conversation needs to go on beyond that, that the actual mutual participation part is followed through on, as opposed to, well, I guess that person didn't really answer my question. Now I don't feel like following through anymore because I'm frustrated with the process and
oh yeah,
all that kind of stuff.
I've been there with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I find helps a lot in doing this kind of candidate research is sometimes on a website, a candidate will put 2 or 3 of their qualifications on a piece of paper, and it can come across as either too brief or too vague or kind of too dead of a presentation. Could you go through some of the qualifications? I know you sent over quite a bit, but for the audience to hear straight from your mouth, the amount of experience that you've had over the years can really help go from you just being another name on the ballot to somebody who actually has qualifications.
Yeah, I thought long and hard about this when you sent over your questions, because I had someone say to me, what does being a welfare director have to do with being a city commissioner? So I thought about my experiences, and I have 2 major experiences in my life with working. And the first one is Clark's Liquor Store, which was my family store. I grew up hearing about the store. Everything revolved around the store. My grandparents and my parents then owned it for over 60 years. I worked there from 1971 through 1983, either full-time and part-time. This experience gave me an appreciation for the problems of small businesses and how to survive in today's world. It's a lot of long hours when you own a business. It's a lot of hard hours. A lot of times you're like on the edge on what is the best thing we can do. We have to be able to pay the bills. We want to be able to pay our employees. Employees don't get benefits, but that's how we make it work, because small businesses don't generate millions of dollars,
right,
for the most part. So the store gave me an insight and appreciation for the challenges that small businesses have today. And that was part of when we get into economic development. I have a piece in there about that. But when I graduated from college, I went and started working for the Cumberland County Board of Social Services. And that was in 1976. I started out as a entry-level caseworker. I made $4,900 a year.
Wow. Wow.
And I really learned a lot. I was deeply affected. I did a lot of home visits, especially the people in the townships who had no way of getting in to do the recertifications, mostly seniors for food stamps. And when I pulled up to their houses, they were tar paper covered shacks, dirt floors, a leaky kerosene heater. And the one guy I'll never forget, at 10 in the morning, was eating fish and water for breakfast, and I was like on the edge.
Right.
But I had never been exposed to that. And the exposure that I had to see other people in those type of situations really affected me deeply and really shaped who I became, because not everybody can help themselves.
Sure.
We all have a responsibility to help those who don't have that ability.
Right.
So that was like, I'll just never forget that home visit. That was my first one, and it blew me away. After a caseworker, I worked in the food stamp program and the child support paternity unit. Then I became an income maintenance supervisor, and in that I had welfare, food stamps, and Medicaid, and then I had the legal department. And when we worked on a lot of different things, but I usually had anywhere from 4 to 7 employees under me, how to check cases, the usual things supervisors do. Then I became a chief investigator, and that was a new title for the agency. It was to have someone directly over all the investigators to make sure there was eligibility was being done correctly, making sure that we had truthful circumstances. We had to make sure that we were able to recoup any money that was either given out in error or given out because we did not get all of the information that should have been given.
Right.
Then I became the administrator of social work, and I had all the social services under me. And that was dealing with the homeless and people without utilities and people without food and just any situation you can imagine where somebody's really down and out. Mm-hmm. Then I was promoted to deputy director of welfare, and I was administratively under the direction of the director for all programs and the administrative responsibilities of the Board of Social Services.
Right.
And I did that for a year and a half, and then I was promoted to director of welfare. And that's when I was responsible for all facets of the agency. Mm-hmm. And that's where I really, really honed my skills and abilities because there was so much responsibility.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't know if you want me to get into specifics.
We could. Let's put a bow on that section because I want to make sure you have plenty of time to get into your actual campaign information. Right. So just to kind of give my takeaway what you just said. So you have direct experience in small business, and so you understand the needs of small businesses in the area, and that gave you like introductory level managerial experience. And then you went into social services where you got to go into specific situations. You know, as somebody like myself who's done a fair bit of traveling, when you hear about something from the outside, like you hear about a foreign country like Vietnam or Albania. I remember a conversation I had last year with somebody, and I said, yeah, I spent 6 months in Albania, and they looked at me like, weren't you scared for your life? And blah, blah, blah. I was like, I feel a lot safer in Tirana, Albania than I do parts of Cumberland County. You know what I mean? Like, I hate to be a negative Nancy, but the point is, once you go and you see something firsthand, it really shapes your perspective a lot more. So when you talk about going into that person's home, eating fish in water, you're not just talking about some abstract policy of social service. You're talking about real people, real situations. And then beyond that, I guess as you went up the chain of social services, you had different positions where you had to oversee a lot of the managerial aspects of that, and it's direct government experience.
Yes.
So, in my evolution of understanding who you are, it's about a month or two ago, you were just somebody sitting at a commission meeting, and now because you've sat down to take the time and just explain yourself a little bit, you've gone from just some random person at a meeting to somebody who sounds actually qualified to do what you're seeking to do. So, from my perspective, thank you for taking the time to sit down and explain all that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. So then, let's dive into some of your campaign things that you want to get into. I'll reiterate again your commitment to answering all the emails and all the questions and putting it in the reports and showing up to do things like this. That was part of your campaign agenda, and we don't need to talk about it too much more because we already have, but again, that's the whole point. People should have a choice. They should know some relatively sufficient amount of information. And so I would say, what would you like to highlight after that?
I think I would like to start with economic development.
Okay.
In terms of optics, when you drive into Millville on either North 2nd Street or Wheaton Avenue,
Yep.
you just see piles of rubble.
Mm.
And it's from a demolished historic glass factory complex that was a big part of Millville's history.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody either had a family member working at Wheaton Glass or Armstrong or Kerr,
Mm-hmm.
or they knew somebody, or they were working there themselves.
Right.
It's a shame that Millville didn't have a developer who had the ability to clean up those brownfields,
Mm-hmm.
and then the vision to maybe convert that space into part of maybe a park and a mixed-use complex that could have townhouses, condos, lofts, apartments, small businesses, something other than the big piles of trash and old bricks that we see laying around and have been laying.
Right. You
been laying
obviously
around.
want to do basic cleanup of trash or unused things, and why not develop that land into something more practical and functional?
Right, and there are many types of restorations that have been successful in other towns like Bethlehem, Pennsylvania,
Sure.
Windsor Locks, Connecticut, Alexandria, Virginia. They've all had these sites and they've converted them. They've gotten the right developer or been able to tap into funding.
Yeah.
And, that's what needs to be done. And I think in order for that to happen, we need to hire a real economic development director, somebody with a proven track record.
Right.
And I think that's really important.
Actually, one part of that the overall economic development thing that I wanted to bring up was you had this idea for kayak and canoe rentals.
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. The Morris River and Union Lake are two gems that Millville has, and they're underutilized.
Mm-hmm.
And if you walk back into City Park, Waltman City Park, there's a piece of an old pier or docking right on the river. It's behind the Holly City Tax Office. And I would like to see a launch site built there for canoes and kayaks.
Sure.
And then maybe we could have, think tiny house, but a tiny shed type building. And you could have canoe and kayak
Oh,
rentals.
right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You could have bait.
Mhm.
And what I was thinking is you could even use some of our nonprofits who work with our youth, and they could set these small businesses up
Yeah.
and teach kids entrepreneurship.
Sure.
And I know these are big ones, but I think it's a way to start to utilize our assets.
It's really not, I mean, in my mind, it wouldn't be all that difficult. And when I read that in our email correspondence, I actually thought of a friend who already does kayak and canoe rentals out in Parvin State Park.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want a possible connection to actually go from a pie in the sky idea to somebody who might actually be able to help make it happen,
Right.
let me know, and maybe you guys can get something going.
Right, and it could even be done on Union Lake too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we have to use these assets for ecotourism. It's a big deal. People want to come into a place that has like a great public park system.
Yep.
That's like quality of life issues.
I've actually heard from Doug Albrecht and Victoria Lodes a couple times that's why they're focusing on some of the county park and other general beautification process, because that leads to more economic development.
Yes.
As in, the developers want to come in knowing that when they raise their families in the area, there's things for their family to do, and there's a good school system and all that kind of stuff. So it's one thing to just talk about economic development, but a lot of these things are interconnected. And you
they
might not
absolutely
realize
are,
that
yes.
unless you're a politician having to wheel and deal these things on a regular basis.
Also in the area of economic development, with the economic development director, I would like to see a grant writer hired in that department. And that grant writer can not only write the grants, search for the grants, write the grants, but they could administer the grants. And that would help. If you administer the grants, you get the administrative fees that go with it. And that would help offset the cost.
Right.
So to me, that's like a no-brainer. And then we have a guy in Millville, Bill Horan, and I can't remember the name of his company. He goes around and takes pictures of everything and posts them. That's great. But if we had an economic development director, you could work with someone like that. You would have to make sure that those pictures are available to the city, that the city can use them.
Right.
They are just not the property of a photographer.
Right.
And you could use that. The economic development director could certainly use that, and so could the person doing all this publicity, conversely with the economic development.
Right. A little bit of synergy,
Yes.
mutual reward type stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm doing my thing and I'm trying to generate attention, I think about maybe linking up with somebody like a Bill Horan. I don't even know who he is, but again, when I read your correspondence, it was like, oh, well, if somebody like that is interested in collaborating, that would be good, not just for the city, but for the whole county and everybody trying to get something started.
Right, yeah.
A little bit of collaboration, maybe.
Yeah, collaboration goes a long way.
Sure does.
Small businesses, they are the bedrock of our community. And a lot of times, people don't even know they've opened.
Right.
Like we just had another vegan restaurant open
Where?
on High Street. It's closed.
Oh,
It
already.
opened and closed. So I would like to see these new businesses come into the city commission meetings, be introduce them, let them briefly speak and give an overview of their business and the services that they offer. I think that's important. And not only that, we should do it with existing businesses to give freshen them up, because so many businesses start out with something, but they expand and they have more.
Sure.
And so many people are afraid to walk up and down High Street, and I don't know why, because I do all the time.
Yeah.
I've never had a problem. They don't know what's there.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's important to
A little bit more
highlight
promotions.
small businesses.
Yeah, I agree.
And that takes nothing.
Right.
takes
Just
nothing.
show up and just talk.
Yeah.
It's already like a TV show in a sense.
Yeah.
So you might as well get your advertising
exactly.
for free at the
Exactly.
commission meeting. One area I wanted to hit was the public safety topic.
Right.
Because how do I set this up properly and diplomatically?
Good luck.
Let's just say I've been doing my interviews this year, and one person on the campaign trail suggested that with the amounts of crime going on, this person did not necessarily see a need to hire more police officers. And so from our correspondence, I don't think you would agree with that, but I also don't want to put words in your mouth. So how do you feel about the overall issue of public safety in Millville? And specifically, because I've heard this comment come up several times, what's going on with our police staffing?
Well, I feel like public safety in Millville is the third rail of politics, but you have to address it. I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form with public safety, but I do know that we need to fully staff our police department. We are really depleted right now. Excuse me. It's a big stress on the officers who are there and trying to do a good job, as well as their supervisors. And I think we should fully staff all of our first responders, police, fire, and EMS. I think we should not only fully staff them, but we need to give them the tools they need to be successful and keep us safe.
What type of tools are you referring to?
Well, for example, they just purchased a used ambulance.
Okay.
And that's a great idea. They're going to refurbish it.
Sure.
It'll take a few months, but after next year, when the other one comes into service that's being redone, they'll have 4. And the chief feels that that'll be sufficient.
Okay.
Where we won't have to call in so many times Rosenhain or Lawrence Township
Right.
or Laurel Lake.
Mm-hmm.
We really need to have those services within the city limits to be able to promptly respond to people's emergencies.
Sure. Then are you implying that there are other tools that also need to be fortified?
I think we need to be on top of all of these vehicles, especially like fire and ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
There's like almost a 5-year turnaround from where you go when you order them to when you get them.
Oh, right. I have heard that.
So you need to really have a schedule set, and you need to be able to maintain what you do have.
Right.
And new equipment comes out all of the time. They need to have that new equipment. They need to be trained to be able to use it effectively.
Okay, cool. All right. Let's see. How about, what do you think would also be a good highlight for your campaign?
Well, I'm going to touch on ATVs and motorcycles.
Sure.
Because I have found that it's not just a Millville problem, it's a statewide problem.
Yes, it is.
And I've talked to a lot of my friends who are officials in other areas in North and Central Jersey, and they work also in government. They are all experiencing the same thing.
It's funny. So before I started going down this rabbit hole of local politics, I traveled a lot. And when I was in Vietnam, their driving rules are almost non-existent. There's, 90-year-old grandma just like whipping out into the middle of traffic, or people are going down the wrong side of the road, or I don't know if you've ever seen the videos of if there's a long line of traffic and you're approaching it, the appropriate thing to do is to just literally go through it. As in, the people will look and kind of make room for you to cut through the line as they're moving forward, as opposed to like there actually being a traffic light or something. And so, actually, it's kind of fun at first. It's like a little video game. I'm going to get on my rented scooter and I'm going to go through traffic and I'm not going to slow down or whatever. But I actually had a couple friends die out there because of this crazy traffic or whatever. And a lot of it is because of this lawless driving behavior. And now I'm not trying to say Cumberland County and the ATV problem is as bad as Vietnam, but it's a real concern.
It is.
You've got people driving all over the place, ripping through traffic lights and stuff like that, and it's a little disheartening to know that I first heard about this about 2 years ago. Apparently it was going on for years before that, and we're still kind of here talking about it.
I understand in one respect why the Attorney General stopped the high-speed chases.
Sure.
Because that had an inherent danger that just was worse. But I think this is state problem. I think we need a lot of collaboration. I don't think it helps to sit there and say things like, well, it's this administration, you can't work with them. I believe you can work with any administration. And I think what we need to do in Cumberland County is start with the prosecutor's office, to have a sit down with them, the state police, the local police. And then in November, there'll be a general election where there will be a whole new administration put in. I don't know which party. It doesn't matter which party. It's an issue that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, it should be a nonpartisan.
Right, and I think using League of Municipalities and NJAC, which is the New Jersey Administration for Counties. they should all be working together. We should all be working together to come up with a solution.
Right.
That the Attorney General's office can put out those guidelines.
Right.
Because it is statewide. It can't be solved on a local level. But you have to collaborate and cooperate with other entities to solve the problem.
Absolutely. And sometimes a problem like that is a lot more difficult to solve
Absolutely.
than you would think.
Yes.
I mean, in 2025, you would think you just call the local police stations and say, hey, could you crack down on this a little bit?
Oh,
but
no,
it's not that simple.
It doesn't work that way, no. And we need to rebuild trust with our police and our citizens.
Yeah.
And I think that once it's fully staffed, it can be done with neighborhood walking patrols, the bike patrols, because they have the electric bikes. And they can just interact more with the community.
Yep.
But I wouldn't want to step on any of the chiefs' toes.
No.
But as a commissioner, I would certainly want to know what's going on in those departments.
Sure.
To make it better and move it up, move it forward.
Cool. And then maybe we'll touch on one more before I move on to the next section of the talk. I just want to make sure whatever you felt was most important, you got out there.
Okay.
Got the adult night out thing,
I have
shared services.
Code enforcement.
Okay, go ahead.
Code enforcement needs to be fully staffed.
Yeah.
The reports should be shared to the appropriate departments when violations are found, so that if there's a violation from another department, that gets sent over. Staff and code enforcement should be assigned to a specific area. That way they're not haphazardly being assigned to go places.
Do you mean geographical?
Yes,
or okay.
yes, geographical. This is your responsibility.
Or this section
Okay,
counts,
Walt,
yeah.
this is
Okay.
yours. Bob, this is yours.
Right.
And that way, they also get to know the area better.
Right, as opposed to scattered around.
Yes.
And you spread yourself thin.
Right, and I don't think there should be any delays for issuing permits or follow-up inspections. And we need to be relentless on these slumlords and absentee landlords.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're all bad, but there's so many empty buildings.
I've been hearing about that.
And I think that what we need to do is look at the ordinances and make sure that we have all the teeth that we need
Yeah.
to go after these guys and be relentless. Give them citations, make them to come to court,
Yeah.
and make sure the municipal judge that you hire understands that this is a serious issue and we want to address.
Right.
We want you to enforce the law, not a slap on the wrist. We want you to enforce it.
Right. Because you just don't want the city to fall into decay,
No,
obviously.
and we want people to be able to enjoy their neighborhoods and their
Right.
lives. They have the right, even if you're a tenant, for Pete's sakes, you have the right to peace
Yep.
and you have the right to a good life.
Right.
So,
Cool. All right, now let's dive into this next section because, for everybody out there, we only get an hour for this radio thing, but Patricia did something like 13, 14 pages of answers on the questionnaire. That'll be up on my website in, hopefully just a couple more days as I renovate the site. But later on in the summer, when everybody's campaign information comes out, we could do like a longer form podcast to dive into the information even deeper. But there's also an opportunity for us here to talk about how do we make this information sharing process a little smoother so that maybe average citizens don't drive 30 minutes away to get somebody to answer basic questions. There's just a process in place where everybody is a little bit more empowered to make better informed choices. So, from my perspective, I've thought of 3 advocacy ideas that I think could help. So the first one is just reintroducing civics into school curriculum. As in, right now, I get it, there's a broad social studies type curriculum, but I'm talking about more like, how does your city hall work? When you have something you need to get done, does an 18-year-old know, like, oh, well, maybe you should call the city clerk for that? Or, no, that's more of a Parks and Rec type question. Or, you know what I mean? Like, or I always come back to this one story. The first year I started doing this, I looked at the ballot and I was like, okay, I have to vote for a county surrogate. Well, what is a county surrogate? And now I feel like I'm playing catch up. What do they do? How is any one person going to do it different than the other person? And what does party politics have to do with it? Like, what's a Republican surrogate or what's a Democratic surrogate? So what's your general take on getting our students a little bit more informed and educated?
I agree with that completely. I didn't take civics till college, and I had no idea what any of that was.
Right.
I mean, I just registered at the time what my parents were registered as. I voted pretty much, what I heard them talk about at the dinner table. I didn't know anything about how to find out information.
Right.
So I think that's important, and I think it needs to start. In 4th grade, they do a piece on New Jersey.
Okay.
In social studies. And I think in 4th grade, you could incorporate a small bit of civics, local civics, in 4th grade. And then I think at the high school level, maybe sophomore, junior year, I think that should be included. I think there should be a piece in their either history or their social studies area. That's really important because you're right, people don't know what these positions do. They have no clue.
Right. And there's also something to be said about leading by example and making it a cultural norm, as in everybody does actually pay attention to city hall meetings, or everybody does actually read up for a weekend before an election to make sure that they're casting an informed vote, as opposed to the all too often story I hear is, I don't know who's running at the local level. I just walk in and...
Oh, I know that name. They're my neighbor's cousin's sister's brother.
Right.
Whatever, yeah.
And I met them at a county fair one time, and he told a really nice joke. And so I like that guy. So, yeah, hopefully, it can, I hate to poke too much fun at it, but really...
No,
we can do better. We can do better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So then the second idea that I usually put forward is having the county basically do what I'm doing. In the sense of, I guess during COVID, the local newspaper kind of collapsed and shut down. And by my understanding, they did a pretty good job of researching the candidates and asking them questions like I did. So that there was at least a piece in the newspaper that people could review. But now it seems as though nobody's doing it except for me, or maybe somebody else out there. I don't know. I don't want to say I'm the only guy, like I know everything, but how hard would it be when the candidates hand in their signatures to the clerks? The clerks just go, okay, now here's a questionnaire. Could you fill that out within the next couple months? And we also do like basic podcast interviews to dive deeper into the issues and give yourself an opportunity to put a personality behind what's written on a piece of paper, answers from a questionnaire and all that. Do you think there's room for the county to be providing that type of service?
I don't know, because the county, their resources are so limited. So I'm not sure about that. But I remember, I think it was 2 elections ago, where there was a civic group in Millville. I don't know who it was. It escapes me. But they had a forum for all of the county, or the city commissioners at the Levoy.
Okay.
And questions were asked, and they were answered. And that was very helpful and very informative.
Right.
So I think if some of these groups could arrange something like that, it would be really helpful.
Sure.
Because the more knowledge empowers people to make good choices.
Sure.
And I think that's really important for people to know what our candidates stand for. I mean, if you don't like my ideas, that's fine. this guy might have ideas more in line with what you want. So you have the choice to vote for him.
Right.
You know, it's really important.
Yeah. So one way or another, whether it's a county or a civic group or
Or you.
somebody like me with way too much time on my hands to go down every rabbit hole. So it should be happening one way or the other. And then either way, whether it's a county or a civic group doing that, the third idea is to just rebuild the local press. Because even if you had the county giving out basic questionnaires and putting it on a website, kind of like mine, you'd still need somebody running around being like, well, I saw what you wrote on your question, or for your answer packet, whatever you want to call it. But, you know, it wasn't 100% clear what you meant by this. Could you explain it more? Or your opponent has a differing view. Can we compare those so we can clarify what the actual differences are there? Do you think like it's important to rebuild the local press?
I do. I don't know that it would be an actual physical newspaper anymore.
Sure.
We do have a couple things, the South Jersey News
Okay.
and the Reminder.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe somebody could do something with that,
Yeah.
and they could, you know, present this kind of information, because
Right.
they do exist and people read them.
Right.
I mean, people truly read them.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the answer is. And I know the internet is another answer. It's just that on the internet it's great, but then you get these keyboard warriors,
Sure.
and they contribute nothing except negativity, and they have no solutions. They want to criticize, and, you know, we have to try something different. We have to try something new.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's also a, how do I say this? My critique with a lot of the internet stuff is it provides a lot of efficient communication, but a lot of that stuff tends to be scattered.
yeah.
So you'll see individual candidates with their own Facebook pages or Instagram accounts or something like that. But if you were to just use that form of media, you'd have to follow like 50 different people
Right.
who, maybe do one Facebook post a week. And I'm supposed to remember what Antoine McClellan said about public safety 4 months ago on Facebook. Like, that's not
Yes,
not going to be enough.
No.
We need some type of consolidation of all these information sources so that, you know, maybe I'm a little bit lazy, but I prefer around beginning of October. Like, I just want to review the information, look into what the issues are, what the candidates' different takes are on those issues, then maybe go to a meet and greet or a candidates forum, and then cast my vote and then move on with my life. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong, people should be more engaged in local politics and all that kind of stuff, but we also have to be realistic about what the average person is really going to do.
Time constraints.
Yeah.
People work 2 and 3 jobs just to survive.
Yep.
They have families. They have to worry about their children. I know, it's a big thing. I mean,
And then they go to a meeting and their question isn't actually answered, or you know what I
it's like,
mean?
yeah, I do.
Yeah. So hopefully, as we move forward, we can figure out ways to really streamline this, because I think the average person really does deserve a place, so that when they do their homework, it doesn't turn into like a big scavenger hunt or anything like that.
I absolutely agree. But I think you could maybe use that base of those 2 small publications, because
Oh,
they
yeah.
do exist.
Yeah, I did try to reach out to the Vineland Voice. Are you familiar
I'm
with
not
that one?
familiar with that one.
So they're based out of Hamilton. The Hamilton Gazette, I think, is their sister paper or whatever. You know, I don't mean to be rude or whatever, but their publisher was hesitant about working together, and I'm just like, well, who's going to publish basic information? You know, like, you've already got a newspaper going. You could just freaking cover the election a little bit.
Yeah, that would be
I
nice.
mean, that's what you're
Sure.
kind of expected to do, right? Yeah.
I mean, just for the primary with all the Democrats were running,
Yeah.
a lot of my friends on Facebook were like, how do I find out information on these candidates? I'm like,
InformTheVoteNJ.com. That's how. Yeah, and that's assuming they're participating, the
Right.
candidates.
Right.
So, yeah, we've only got about 1 minute left, so let's wrap it up. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to InformTheVoteNJ.com radio hour here on Cruising 92.1 WVLT in Vineland. I sat down today with Patricia Clarke-Kears, who's running for Millville City Commissioner. Please review her information and information about all the candidates. We've got a few months left, and hopefully I'll have it all up there by the time October rolls around. Thanks, and see you next time.
Want to know the secret to what makes Rita's Water Ice so delicious? Did you know that Rita makes their ice fresh every day with real fruit at each store? It's that combo of real fruit and real fresh that makes Rita's Italian ice so one of a kind. There's really no place like Rita's. 73 Landis Avenue, Bridge.